we saw in the last few hours a huge crowd gathering in Minneapolis to march, to protest about what...
Saw a clip about this. You've just turned over to Sky News.
Some tension, some
coppers fucking murdered a guy,
some of the protesters outside of a police
and he is murdered.
Tear gas fired by
you can kneel on a guy's fucking neck till he loses fucking breath. It's murder.
So much, haven't we, over the last few years, incidents like this, and a lot of people's memories going back to New York in 2014, and that phrase, I can't...
No, well, I'm no with it.
Back then by
cops will probably get fucking reprimanded or something, but no, serious.
No one was charged then. We've seen
they are, he's just said it.
That's why that anger boils over, because people see that things aren't changing.
Murder's murder.
And it's only when video emerges of one of these incidents that they really get the attention people feel they deserve.
Greg Minor reporting there. This is Sky News. Coming up next, we'll get the latest take on the coronavirus pandemic from the opinion pages of today's newspapers, including this cartoon in the Daily Telegraph charting car loose. Bit of a spike round April thanks to Dominic Cummings' journey.
Fucking great. Bit of a spike round April.
Need a new phone.
Funny that was.
Britain's ruling elite, and it's also got a cut-out mask of Dominic Cummings you can put on if you want to avoid being troubled by the police. Well, in the Times, Daniel Finkelstein, the Conservative peer, argues that ministerial aides need to be more accountable to the public and welcomes the news conference. Philip Johnson writes in the Daily Telegraph that the UK's lockdown policy and the delay in lifting it is a reflection on Mr Cummings' paranoia and Boris Johnson's over getting the virus. And in the Eye, Katie Balls of The Spectator argues that the row is putting public confidence in the government to the test and could still cost Mr Cummings his job. In The Guardian, Stephen Riker, who advises the government on behavioural...
The only reason why he travelled, because he knows what no one else is supposed to know. There is no fucking virus.
Away from Mr Cummings...
Just honestly think, people, if there was a mega true virus wiping folk out, Cummings would have travelled all them miles. The answer is no.
Coronavirus, and in the Daily Telegraph,
because all them lot know.
So the Prime Minister explaining the latest transport usage figures, some things we got used to at the daily news conferences.
That's a good one, any of that. It's funny that. Transport usage, Dominic Cummings dies spike. For me.
This in the Times, car crashed into the government orders, and Dominic Cummings running from the scene with Boris Johnson in a baby seat. He's attacked by media plants in Steve Bell's cartoon in The Guardian, a reference to that.
Brilliant you do these cartoons, ain't it?
Barnard Castle welcomes adequately sighted drivers.
Fucking brilliant.
That is Paul Thomas's cartoon in the Daily...
Can you read this?
Well, joining me today to look through those are the Times columnist and...
Fucking damn right you should be grilled, the fucking bastard. Someone fucking said to me yesterday, oh, any horrible what they've been doing to Cummings, they've been shaking his car and all this fucking business. I said, fucking horrible. He was part of the fucking people who put us all in fucking lockdown, working with the fucking government. Don't you think that was fucking horrible? I said, if some fucker slashed his fucking throat, he wouldn't be good enough.
Because a young lady asked Priti Patel at the conference last week when she might be able
I don't feel sorry for the cunt.
Weddings would be allowed. You know, would they be allowed in August or September? All Priti Patel had to say is, I'm awfully sorry, but we don't know yet. We're just going to have to see how things go. But, oh my goodness, rolled out stuff about individual responsibility. Why don't politicians understand that clear answers, even if they're unwelcome, will be understood by the public? We're not children.
Got to get clear answers. Your colleague on the Times, Daniel Finkelstein, I mean, he says we should welcome the fact that an influential aide is giving a news conference. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. He paints the history of aides to presidents and to prime ministers, and shows how the aides have become more and more important, and perhaps sometimes the cabinet colleagues less and less important. he neither approves nor regrets that, but says that if they're going to be that important, it's quite right that they should give press conference. It's quite right that they should be tested. And all these people who are a bit grumpy about Dominic Cummings being allowed to give a press conference in the Rose Garden are wrong. And I think that's right. We saw Dominic Cummings, we heard his answers to the questions, and
which would have been lies.
Been asked, and we ought to have heard his answers. It's a good thing.
He's lying his answers.
And advisors are powerful people.
He wrote all his fucking fake script.
Of course, it begs the question, doesn't it? Should
either he rewrote it or some fucker else wrote it for him.
Be as powerful as Mr. Cummings.
There's no excuse for travelling them miles. They don't give a fuck what you fucking say.
I think in Britain at the moment,
when no fucker else could move anywhere and everyone else were restricted.
You don't have,
and he's allowed to come up with excuses and it gets accepted.
The Prime Minister
There's no excuse. I don't give a fucking rat's bollocks what you fucking say.
Downing Street, and central in that Downing Street web is Dominic Cummings. I would like to see a return to cabinet government, but this isn't a new phenomenon. The importance of cabinets and cabinet meetings.
See bars in front of them there.
Over perhaps 30 or 40.
That's where they both should be, literally.
To reverse it.
No, not since the days when Jim Callaghan had a cabinet meeting, I think, lasting 2 days.
Only work for themselves, governments.
Policy.
Originally set up to represent the people, but that's long gone.
Suggestion from Katie Balls, who
they all work for themselves in deep state.
The Boris Johnson crowd pretty well. That he is very, very subject to public opinion, and she's even saying that the fact that we're seeing well above 60% of people saying they don't really trust.
Public fury may not undo Cummings.
Could actually change Boris Johnson's mind. Do you think that's likely?
I think it's a significant call, particularly coming from the person it does, Katie Balls, who's a Spectator writer. She's not unsympathetic to the government, and as far as I know, not unsympathetic to Boris Johnson. But what she is taking on is the idea that Boris Johnson just does what he likes and doesn't care what the public thinks.
That's right.
As she points out, Dominic Cummings has been terrifically important to Boris Johnson in knowing what the public thinks, engaging the public mood, and in angling the public.
Oh, well, they know what the public thinks, all right.
Look at his success.
They knew every fucker would bow down and go in the fucking houses.
In government, an administration that is almost neuralgic.
Absolute fucking sheep. Yeah, they knew what they thought, all right.
By day as it changes, and in those circumstances, she doesn't.
No rebellions whatsoever. We saw, did we?
Can be safe.
Now we've got a number of columns. The one
just absolute compliance
by Professor Riker.
That's your downfall, folks.
Of the individual
with this coronavirus fucking lockdown, that was all your downfalls.
That during
compliance.
This pandemic, the collective voluntarily has been dominant, and that's the big mistake now that the government's making, that they seem to be making exceptions for themselves. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with it. Stephen Riker treads fairly carefully on this, but was it Stephen Riker? Yes. No, it's Carl Frey in the Financial Times. He treads fairly carefully on this, but he seems to think that a collective spirit of we're all in this together is the most important thing, rather than the letter of the law. And certainly, I think if the government had asked us to use our common sense and explained how common sense ought to direct us, I don't.
Fuck me, common sense. That's fucking long gone in the public.
We've had the attempt.
They've had common sense fucking removed by many years of fucking brain control.
Dominic Cummings into a lot of trouble. There's a strong sense, I think, of using your common sense and being sensible.
Phones
things, and, he
connected to the internet.
In countries with a strong collective sense. Like
television,
Sweden,
all brain control.
And also in South Korea, they seem to have been just as successful as we have here.
Well, we're joined by now Claire Fox from the Institute for Ideas.
Common sense is fucking long gone, isn't it?
Common sense. Do you think Downing Street's handling of the Dominic Cummings affair represents common sense?
There's only a few of us with common sense what left.
I think that the prior problem is exactly as Matthew described it, which
and the percentage of them have just been wiped out in nursing homes.
Guidance In fact, if you read the detail of it and you had a sense of the spirit of that guidance, and we were told it, rather than being able to use our discretion and our judgment in that way, which Dominic Cummings did, it ended up getting reduced to a pretty stark black and white set of rules, even though actually behind the scenes, and if you looked at the website, it was a bit more nuanced than that. So the problem that they've now got is that Dominic Cummings comes along and says, well, I just use my judgment, which is what I think they should have allowed the British public to do within a set of guidance. And of course everybody
exactly,
says,
yeah, I agree with that.
Because they didn't ever
I thought that myself.
Clearly. And so
at the time when we were in lockdown, let people be their own judgment. You don't need a government protecting you from any virus if there ever was one. If I want to take a risk in my life to go out if there was a virus around, that's at my own peril, my risk. That's what she just said.
One of the articles, which was, the behavioural psychologist, who said we based this on having this collective spirit and, we don't want the messaging to be interfered with, would indicate that they didn't quite trust us. It was more of a manipulation behind the scenes. And I do think that if there's a criticism of Dominic Cummings, is that he has been one of the people advocating that, the behavioural scientists could tell us how to behave. And
in theory, Cummings is right and has done the right thing.
To have given that discretion a wider hearing.
Right, but the difference is he's been allowed.
Do this, do that, do this, do that. There's now come back to
as Boris Johnson's fucking said.
I was a bit puzzled by the article.
He's done the right. Boris Johnson's backing him up, saying he's done the right thing anyway. He used his own instinct. Yeah.
Had the edge when it comes.
We should have been allowed to use his own instinct, but we haven't. We were in lockdown. So Cummings should have abide by their own fucking words. Should have swallowed their own words, shouldn't he?
Well, I mean, there's a peculiar argument in this. On the one hand, you could say that, democracies have had to adopt authoritarianism in order to deal with this. So I don't know if that's a great moment. Actually, it's an argument that says we should all have a kind of collectivist, particular type of democracy, and it does rail against individualism. I think that the difficulty is that in a free society, freedom should be sacred, and therefore to compromise on it requires both exceptional circumstances, which this was.
They locked us down as a test, I feel, to see how gullible and compliant the fucking public actually can be.
I actually think, however, the danger
and they got their answer.
Society and a free democracy is that something like the lockdown, if it's over-interpreted.
So if there is a fucking second wave, they can certainly get on with it because they know how compliant the public is. Lock us down again and everyone will just scurry on into their houses.
It's the right thing to do. However, I understand that if you use your judgment and drove somewhere to go for a walk in the park because you thought, the local park was overcrowded, and then you got fined by the police or shamed in a newspaper, you do feel, well, why is that fair? And, tens of thousands, I think it's 13,000 people have been fined for breaking this lockdown, let alone the fact that
that should be scrapped.
Neighbours complaining.
It was unlawful anyway, apparently.
The shop twice, feeling guilty if you go to the shops to buy a birthday card and it's not essential and people kind of looking at you oddly and all these kind of things. So that sense of unfairness is really undoing them. I do think there's been a media frenzy, not just media, there's been a frenzy to get him out. But I'm not suggesting in any way that people aren't angry about it. That would just be wrong. This has had cut through, and to a certain extent, there is that irony that having
done us a favour, really, that Cummings, isn't it?
Voted that they don't.
Feels like he's done us all a favour.
Behind the scenes advisors running everything, as in, dare I say it, Brexit. They feel suddenly, oh my God, there is a lot of unelected people who think there's a different rule for them. That is one of the difficulties for Cummings now.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire Fox.
Thanks to Cummings' fuck up, they'll tread lightly on everyone's movements. So thank you, Cummings, to be honest with you.
Handled coronavirus best, but Carl Frey does make, I think, the important point that at least in democracy...
But you're a cunt for going against fucking
comes out,
your own policies when every fucker else had to abide by it.
Whereas, for instance, in China, the fact that everything was hushed up for so long from the beginning is one of the reasons we're where we are now.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed. Very nice to see you. This is Sky News. Coming out next, more than 30 Conservative MPs have called on the Prime Minister's chief advisor to quit. We'll speak to one of them.
The first daily briefing announcing some highly significant changes to the way we are going to live our lives.
Nobody thought they'd be treating so many so quickly.
Something nobody expected.
What are you most worried about at the moment?
Their way of life could be a huge contributing factor.
I think your reports have been excellent to shine a light on an area that doesn't get as much attention.
This is the biggest challenge this country has faced since the war.
This is like a big propaganda ad, folks. Full coverage here. Full coverage of fucking lies and bullshit.